Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast. And boy, RJ, there is a lot of stuff to talk about. Obviously, we had the emergency deep dive just 2 days ago when the big news was announced that Dan Bylsma would not be back as head coach of the Seattle Kraken. And then breaking live while we were recording that Ron Francis was moved from the general manager position up to president of hockey operations, and Jason Botterill was promoted from assistant GM to the general manager position for the Seattle Kraken. Obviously, lots of stuff to talk about with all of that stuff from Monday. Obviously, we gave our instant reactions to all of that in that emergency pod, but now after the big press conference yesterday that included both Ron Francis, Jason Botterill, as well as Kraken CEO Todd Leiweke and owner Samantha Holloway, we have context for a lot of it that we were definitely missing when we did that emergency pod. So that's nice to have. But we also still have everything from player and coach exit interviews from last week. We still got the stuff from Todd Leiweke and the business side of things and the season ticket holder discounts and everything. Like, there is still so much to talk about as we just now start to truly dive into our season recap.
Yeah, and we kind of struggled with how to divvy it up, and so we'll do the best we can. But man, it is hundreds of lines in my Excel spreadsheet of notes here to cover, and so we'll do as best we can. But I want to thank everyone too for listening to our emergency pod that we put out the other day, where we just kind of gave our scattered thoughts as the news was breaking. Already one of our most downloaded podcasts ever. Which I guess shouldn't come as a huge surprise, but like, just thanks everyone for listening to us right away as we got our instant reaction out there. It was a long day of podcasting, but well worth it.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I appreciate all the comments from everybody as well on it. It was very well received, in addition to just being received by many. So that was definitely good to see. Yeah, we'll kind of dive in, and if this ends up being a two-parter, one, you'll know because you'll just have seen the title already before clicking on it. But I have a feeling it might end up having to be something like that, given how much we have to talk about. The other thing we got to talk about, RJ, though, is our wonderful sponsor, and that is the law offices of Rico Tessendor, personal injury attorney. And RJ, you might happen to know something a little bit about personal injury right now.
Just a little bit. So I did block a shot in my hockey game, and it kind of surprised a lot of the media people as I hobbled over to the presser with Ron and Samantha Holloway and Botterill and Leiweke. We're in a walking boot, and everyone was asking me what happened. And yeah, I blocked a shot in my game. My foot may or may not be broken. They took an X-ray. They spotted what may be a hairline fracture. It's like, well, it doesn't really matter if it is or isn't, because the result is the same. Just stay off of it for a couple weeks and see where you go from there. But yeah, it is a teammate shot. So I feel like I don't need to call Rico. It's probably would not be the right thing to do. But you know, if you do break your foot in another manner, if there is, you know, you're in an accident of some sort, and you know, you do want to call Rico, he would be the guy to call.
Yeah, you know, workplace accident, something like that, or just out and about, somebody decides to trip you, just cause so that would be a good reason. And while we hope none of you ever need his services, the odds say at some point someone out there will be involved in an accident like RJ, whether on the road, at work, or anywhere in between. And when you are, we hope you call Rico at 425-778-9800 or visit his website ricotessendor.com to schedule a free consultation. He's won millions of dollars for his clients and helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area, and as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. Yeah, you should have asked Todd Leiweke yesterday just kind of what the waiver situation is at with the Kraken Hockey League and KCI and everything. I'm sure he would have appreciated that.
Oh, definitely. Actually, I have skimmed that waiver, pretty airtight as it is for pretty much all, you know, sports things like that. So yeah, can't call Rico for that one. I think even he couldn't get out of that.
I was gonna say if Rico's like, you know, a superhero or the main character in a story, liability waiver is probably his arch nemesis, right?
Yeah, I'd say so.
It's probably how that relationship dynamic kind of works. Protagonist, antagonist there. All right, RJ, let's dive into things. And I think we're going to start with Dan Bylsma not being back as Seattle Kraken head coach. This means that the Kraken are going to be moving on to their third head coach in 3 seasons, which is I mean, less than ideal seems like a light way to put it. It's just really something you never want to see if you're the fan of a franchise, you cover a franchise. Just if you own a franchise, if you operate a franchise, you don't want to see this situation develop, and yet that is where we're going with the Seattle Kraken.
Yeah, and it came as a surprise to us. I think came as a surprise to many, including reportedly to him, that he was shocked by the news, according to Elliot Friedman today on 32 Thoughts podcast. And um, I think it was interesting hearing the responses from everybody yesterday about that. And I think all four of them, whether it was ownership or, Francis or Batra, all started by thanking Dan for his time in Seattle, all started their official statements that way, and wanted to, say some positive things about him. And I think, there might be a feeling there that after 1 year, I don't want to say, unfair, but it's just really tough on Dan. And that was my first reaction to the news. You saw it a lot in the emergency pod. It's just that I feel bad for him, because it's, as a coach, in 1 year, you can't really kind of execute your full vision as a coach and really see everything through. But he was an unfortunate, it was unfortunate byproduct of some larger changes.
Yeah, and I think, kind of getting more context both from the press conference yesterday as well as some of the national reporting, as well, whether it was Elliot Friedman or Greg Wyshynski or, others, kind of gives us an idea. But, just thinking about it, just having more than the immediate reaction that we had on the emergency pod, the more I think about it, RJ, the more I kind of went back and thought about things on exit interview day, and kind of not necessarily going through what the players had to say about Dan, but just as we were early formulating our thoughts on what went wrong this season. I just couldn't help but come back around to the fact that so many times during post game lives this year, I would talk about how, say, the defensive system was not working and there needs to be adjustments, and then that evolved into me giving all of the adjustments slowly over the course of like 2 months that could be made, and nothing was happening. The fact that we could look at, whether it's breakouts, working through the neutral zone entries, just cycle games in the offensive zone, and strategies that they could utilize there, and nothing ever really developed or grew beyond what systems were installed through training camp in the first 20 games of the regular season. And I just think that, yes, when you are a head coach in a professional league, one of the top professional leagues in the world, or the highest level in your particular sport, you cannot rest on your laurels ever. And you especially can't do it if your team is essentially out of things by Thanksgiving in an NHL schedule, right? And I just think that at the end of the day, Dan maybe being inflexible with his systems, or not recognizing that something had to change, or not working harder on having that change, is one of those things that, if certainly if I was management, I would be looking at that from my head coach, and say, why is nothing changing? Like, it's very obvious that something needs to be changing. The results are definitely not there. We're not improving the more time goes on. Why are things not changing? And I could definitely see, if there's not a good answer for that come exit interview time, that I would seriously have questions about keeping that coach on.
And you look at what the answer kind of was during exit interview time, and really, I think Dan rested everything on the last 19 games. He said he felt like the team played a lot better in that time. The players kind of echoed that sentiment, thinking that they figured something out in the final 19 games. And I remember listening to that, and I expressed this sentiment on the podcast before. I felt like that wasn't good enough. Those final 19 games, that's still like an 86-point pace. That is not a playoff pace for this team, and that's ultimately not where the team wants to go. And I think you look overall at the season too, and you go backwards as far as your point total from the season prior, and this team wasn't worse than the previous season's team with Dave Haxtell. I mean, you make a couple big additions. I don't know that it was a whole lot better. I'd argue it probably wasn't, but you also got more lucky as far as injury luck. I mean, the Kraken benefited top 5 of NHL teams the most from injuries. So you had that going for you. You got some elite goaltending from Joey Daccord. And the saying, show me a good goalie, I'll show you a good coach, right? That's the kind of thing that can really help a coach. Wasn't able to turn into wins. And I think at the end of the day, you look at Ron Francis's response, and I actually did like his answer here when asked about Dan. He said, he was blunt. I didn't like the way we were playing. I thought we could use more structure and more details in our approach. And I think, Dylan, watching all 82 games like we did, I think we'd agree with that completely. We didn't like the way they were playing. They could use more structure and more details. And I think especially defensively, that was their biggest problem.
Yeah, defense and special teams, right? And like that was like the big thing for me looking back at the season. Why did this team not why was it not more competitive? Why were they not in the playoff chase till the end? Why were they not even a playoff team? And you look and you say you got great goaltending from Joey Daccord. Nobody can deny that. He obviously gave that to you. You scored like a lower tier playoff team, but you were up there with playoff teams in terms of goal scoring. So it wasn't 5-on-5 scoring that did you in, maybe like in previous seasons. This was strictly a problem of the puck was going into the net too often, and if Joey is doing his job, then that means the defense is not doing theirs, and the fact that you were losing the special teams battle just about every single night that you played, right? Not having that little extra oomph from the special teams to maybe overcome the defensive issues, whatever, especially on the power play, it was just too much. And like I said, the fact that and obviously Ron alluded to it too, the fact that those two things were just so obviously issues from the very beginning of this season and never changed, you just can't do that. Like that's just not how these leagues work. That's not how the National Hockey League works. It is just a step too far to not do anything there.
And I think that's ultimately what did Dan in. But then I probably got in the way of your segue, but there were also
Yeah.
some bigger picture stuff things as well.
Yeah, and so that's the next thing that I kind of want to move into here, when talking about it, and that is, we can start with it, maybe Dan's relationships is what we'll call this next situation, and that's I think what has kind of come out from especially the national reporters. But I want to start with the players, RJ, and what they talked about during exit interviews, because they did mention Dan as a man many times during the exit interview. Several players did. Obviously, Chandler Stevenson kind of gave the most highlight grabbing quote of everybody, and I'll let you kind of read that off when you jump in here in a second. But it was a common thread from this player group basically saying that they appreciated the way that Dan tried to connect with them as people, right? He was not just a coach talking down to players or talking to players. He was a human being, a person talking to another person. And that was something that players like Chandler Stevenson, Capo Caco, people from other organizations coming in really did appreciate about what Dan Bylsma was doing with them and the relationship that he was forming with them. And that matches up everything that we knew from him in Coachella Valley, and what not just the players in Coachella Valley, but people throughout the organization in Coachella Valley, and not just like on the hockey ops side of things, but all the way down through the game day ops people, right? All adored Dan and everything that he did down there, and how personable he was, how much fun he was, how relatable he was, all of those things. And I do think that that was something that Dan highlighted, thinking back less than a year ago to his introductory press conference. RJ, that was very much something that Dan did highlight, was that he wanted to, that personal relationships with all of these people is a very important part of this job, and it was something that he wanted to do, and it was something that he wanted to focus on this go around as an NHL head coach. And we maybe glossed over that and looked past that stuff last time, but in light of the last couple days, maybe we shouldn't have as much. But that was very much kind of what he was trying to do this year.
Yeah, and I think it's worth bringing up, especially now, because he talked about it in that presser when he was introduced as the Kraken coach. And I think we maybe didn't focus on it as much because we had seen it in CV, because we were,
Right.
some of the rare media that had the opportunity, because we have family down there, to go down and visit and see a little bit more of the culture in CV than maybe some of the other Kraken reporters got to, being based in Seattle. And Dan seemed like that was his goal from the Buffalo experience. I would say, from his experience there, I think he wanted to change as a person and in his coaching style, and he did that in CV. I think he accomplished that goal in Seattle too. I think that part of the change that he wanted to see happen was a success. And I'll talk about the Chandler Stevenson quote. He said, "It's nice to have a coach that's a human being first, not a coach first." and he expanded on that too. Certain games might not go your way, but the effort's there. It's not always we lost, so we suck and back to the drawing board and all that. And I think it gives you a little window into Dan's coaching style, especially when things were not going well, that maybe he wasn't as hard on the group as another coach would have been. I feel like this might have been a subtle comment on Bruce Cassidy, who was the previous coach that Chandler Stevenson was coming from, and who we know from the athletic surveys, is a coach that I think he was second or third as far as coaches the players
he was top
wouldn't
three.
want to play for. And so I think that speaks just being a tougher coach, being more on your guys. The results speak for themselves, though. I mean, with Cassidy, he's won a Stanley Cup with Vegas and he's done very well. But I think this speaks to Bylsma's style as a coach and trying to connect with players individually. And I do wonder too if that is something that the front office looked at and thought maybe we could use a coach that's closer to the Cassidy mold as far as how they deal with players, because I think you had Bylsma who made that effort to connect with players. I think you had Dave Haxtell who made that effort to, connect with players, maybe not as much as Bylsma, but I think they were both on the player friendly side of coaching. And clearly the roster just didn't respond to it.
No, I think that there is something to, especially when we talk about like issues this season around lack of effort, at times was brought up, or many people in the community would bring that up, in the fan base would bring that up. I do think it's one of those things where like that is what this group for the Kraken has not had yet, which is the person who is going to, be hard on them and is going to call them out if there is a lack of effort or they don't start the game on time, which has been a common thread through both previous coaching staffs. Hi, Fuji.
Oh, hi. Wow. It's rare Fuji comes back here during a podcast.
That's a new one. So I do think that is something that that the front office should explore when factoring in what they're looking for the next head coach for this team, is somebody that is maybe going to push this roster a little bit more, not let them always be so comfortable. I get why you would want that, and I think that there is some positives to having everybody be comfortable. And yes, not just getting on everybody after a loss just because you lost. You're going to lose at least 20 games over the course of an 82 game season, right? Like that's just going to happen. So I understand what Chandler Stevenson is saying there. But I do wonder if this group has needed somebody who's going to ride them a little bit more than what you've had previously.
Yeah, especially given how the season went, where you just really couldn't string more than 3 wins together all season. And also with the back-to-backs, the 0-12 in the second half of back-to-backs, that's one where I wonder if you could at least maybe try pushing some buttons there as far as being harder on a team, just see if it works.
Yeah. And then kind of finally, when asked about exit interviews and if any of the player interviews and anything said during the player interviews led to the front office making this coaching change where they get rid of Dan Bylsma, new Kraken general manager Jason Botterill said, and this is the quote, "To be blunt, not really."
And then just silence after that. That's it. That is the entire comment.
And so I think that tells us that, yes, this was a decision made by the front office. This was one where they said multiple times when asked about it and talked about it. And this was both on the hockey side of things from Ron and Jason, but also from Sam Holloway, talking about it from the ownership standpoint. They wanted to win, and they made this move because they feel like it is going to help this organization and this team win more, is by moving on from Dan. Then, though, RJ, we get the national reporting kind of starts coming out. And I think the one that was the most, that grabbed the attention of Kraken fans the most, was Greg Wyshynski on the Jeff Merrick show. And I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but I do know that he said, look, Dan Bylsma has a big ego, and that played a role in what happened here.
Yeah, and that's kind of took us by surprise, talking about, and especially the way he kind of casually said it too. He didn't really,
he said it like it was just a well-known and just like a given almost that this is known.
Yeah, well, Dan's got a big ego, so this sort of thing. And we kind of talked about this in the car on the way back from the Silvertips Winterhawks game 7, which, by the way, great game to go to with you there. But it feels like maybe that came from Buffalo. And it wouldn't surprise me, given the stories that we've heard from Dan's time in Buffalo, and even the way that he talks about it, that that might be something kind of left over from the person and the coach that he was at that time. That said, I do think, and Elliot Friedman talked about it a little bit today on 32 Thoughts. Sounds like Dan, I guess, wasn't aligned with everybody else in that front office, and I think Friedman's whole point was that you can't win as a team if everybody's not kind of aligned and going in the same direction of the same mindset. And Dan might have been in the way of that compared to the rest of the front office. And so I don't want to speculate on, what the situation was entirely, but it wouldn't surprise me if maybe Dan had his opinions about the way that things should be done. And those opinions might have been different than Ron and the rest of the front office. And as somebody who has won a Stanley Cup as a coach, as somebody who I think has every right to be confident in his opinions, maybe he voiced those and maybe he made it clear that he disagreed. And, that might have ultimately been part of sealing his fate in addition to the team's results.
Right. And look, that is something that happens. It happens in all sports. It happens when this relationship kind of comes around. And if there is friction between the front office and the head coach, more often than not, the front office is going to win that battle. And it is one that you do have to deal with and you have to find a way of resolving. And if you can't resolve it by getting everybody on the same page, somebody does have to go. Like no organization is going to function well and be successful if there is tension and friction between those two entities. It's just not good for I was going to say good for business, but it's just not good for team success. It does not lead to team success. That is for sure. And so hearing that and thinking about that and even thinking about some of the stuff, just kind of throughout the season, maybe, thinking about Shane Wright's ice time and his role and wondering about if there was, if maybe that was part of all of this. It kind of maybe sometimes seemed like it. Things like that I think are going to be interesting. We'll never know the stories, but it makes sense to me, and it then makes sense also like in combination with, look, it wasn't anything that the players had to say. This was just, basically we didn't like the direction he was going in, and he didn't want to change the direction he was taking things in. And at the end of the day, that I think is just what it is. But yes, it does put a lot of what he had talked about, Dan, last season, coming in, talking about wanting to connect with the players, talking about lessons learned since he had left the NHL, kind of having something like that from Wyshynski, which I agree with you is very much tied to his tenure in Buffalo, which did end about as rough as it could. Like nothing was necessarily made public, but we do know that players such as Jack Eichel basically went to the front office, went to ownership, and was like, I will not play for this guy. And like, if that is kind of being known, you got to imagine there's more kind of going on behind the scenes there. I do think that Dan changed. I think he learned lessons from that, and he worked on changing how he approached situations. But yes, if he's a stubborn guy and is going to be like, hey, you hired me to be coach, let me coach, which I think is a fair thing to say. I could see that that creating friction when it comes to a team that, look, is kind of stuck between two different places right now. When you're talking about roster and the moves that they made last offseason, they obviously wanted to get better, but at the same time, you have players like Shane Wright coming in. And yesterday at the press conference, RJ, future, young players was more often than not the answer given when Jason Botterill or Ron Francis was talking about really anything with this organization. And so I could see, one side taking, the opinion of trying to win now and using those new additions, and the other side wanting to focus on developing for the future, and that creating problems internally.
Yeah, and I think that split is something that's really, it's an overall theme that's going to be important. It runs through really everything that we're going to talk about. And it's a hard position for a coach to be in when you have an organization that seems split between two directions. And I mean, spoiler alert for either part 2 of this podcast or later in this podcast, I think they're still split between the two directions.
Yeah.
And it just provides a situation where it's really hard to coach balancing those two priorities. And so I really think it was just friction between Dan and the front office, and not the players, which I think is just very important, because
Mhm.
given how it ended in Buffalo, it's important to point that out. And also, I think if it was friction with the players, it would have sounded a lot different in exit interviews, even just
Yes.
talking to us with the players. And remember last season with Dave Haxtell, even the rumor from, or the report from Emily Kaplan of the ultimatum that some players said they would not return and play for Dave Haxtell. When there is, and again, the organization came out and disputed that, of course, but as with these situations, usually the truth is kind of somewhere in between.
Yeah.
And so when that stuff does happen, usually does come out. And so I think if that was the case with Dan, we would have known about it.
Yes. Kind of talking about the players and kind of going back to exit interviews here, RJ, because some of the other stuff that they talked about as far as the on ice things raised questions, I think, about the coaching, not necessarily, anything on the more personal side of things, but just about the actual job of the coaching staff. And so I kind of want to transition into talking about what the players had to say from exit interviews, and then we'll wrap it back to the coaching because I do think that it matters. I thought one of the most notable things from player exit interviews was the fact that you had three players all come out and say that they needed to play more selfishly, which is not a common thing that you hear during exit interviews, or really just from NHL players at all. That is just not something that you would normally hear. And those three players were Vince Dunn, Jared McCann, and Shane Wright. Shane Wright, I mean, that's literally what we talked about, was like, what would you want Shane Wright to work on during the offseason? I think we talked about that last week. We literally said playing more selfishly. So in that sense, totally on board with that. I think we're probably on board with Vince Dunn and Jared McCann doing it, because what you have here, RJ, is your three best players all saying that they just kind of need to take over a little bit more and do what they're capable of doing. And so I did think that that was interesting to hear. I'll let you give your thoughts. And then also, do you think that that was a system problem? Do you think that Dan and the system was too focused on trying to play a team game, and it did not allow for the more skilled guys to maybe have the freedom that they should have?
I think there might be something to that, because if you look at Vince Dunn, especially, I think a lot of the problems were a result of him trying to do too much. And maybe that is him being boxed in by the system a little bit, where his role isn't to do a whole lot. And so then he has to kind of work outside the system, and it can lead to turnovers and defensive mistakes. I think also particularly on the power play too, whether it's Vince Dunn, Jared McCann, they were trying to kind of funnel plays down low, look for that cross crease pass. And that doesn't really utilize what Jared McCann does best in his shot up high. They weren't very creative in trying to find an area for him. He was kind of an afterthought on the power play, really. And then also that takes away Vince Dunn in the point shot. And when he did use it, it was quite successful, but it felt like that wasn't what they were trying to set up. So I think there is an element of systems there where you're not having things lean toward your best players. And Shane Wright, I think, is a different situation, just because of,
Yeah.
they're trying to shepherd him along slowly. And so I think part of that is just needing to be more selfish, but also maybe need to get a bigger role and a little bit more ice time to do those things in. But that's another situation.
Yeah, and a mentality change. I mean, like, that was something that was talked about during the 3-game scratch, and everything was just him, using his shot more. Like, that was what came out in that wonderful article from Bob Condor for the Seattle Kraken, was just him sitting with Ron Francis up in the press bridge, and Ron just being like, dude, you got to shoot. Like you just have to do this at some point. So I agree. Shane Wright kind of feels like a different thing there. But I did think that was very notable. I thought that those were the names that kind of, in essence, should be saying those things. And again, it's another example of maybe stuff with the coaching staff not working out on ice there. As for other reasons why the team kind of went the way that they did, and how this could relate to Dan, I thought Joey gave a really good answer as for the team losing confidence over the course of the season, and how the mental aspects of the NHL works, where everything kind of snowballs, whether it's good or bad, it snowballs. And it's really hard to kill negative momentum. And, positive momentum will carry. If you get some positive momentum early on in a season, it can just take you the rest of the season. But that negative momentum, if it starts building early on and you struggle out of the gate, it's really hard to kind of get rid of that. And Vince Dunn echoed that, saying that they would kind of beat themselves up a little bit too much. And he echoed a lot of stuff that he talked about earlier in the season, saying that they, like you had just talked about, shouldn't have to try to do so much, which was a very common thing that we heard from Vince Dunn over this course of the season. And things like saying that, we don't have to win the game on the next shift was another thing that was kind of common from Vince Dunn that he echoed during the exit interview. And so I ask again, RJ, those sound like things that could also be a problem with the coaching staff and a reason to maybe want to change the coaching staff if you're kind of letting guys beat up on themselves or letting that momentum build and get carried away. And I know that that's something that all teams struggle with. We've seen good teams have one bad season in the midst of an otherwise dynasty looking core and everything, but it is one where, as I was hearing that from those guys, it's like, where is the coaching staff in this?
Right. And they need to be an important line. And ideally, you'd like the players and the leadership in the room to kind of deal with that themselves. But it's not always possible. I mean, you go through a lot of ups and downs in a season. And so you need the coaching staff to step in those moments. And especially when you can't string together wins. And really what it was just, I thought, the inability to focus for stretches of more than like 3-4 games at a time, where you'd see them start to turn it around. We talk about it on the podcast. Like, is this real? Have they figured it out? And then you just have a total lapse in focus type of game from the team, and it would all kind of fall apart. And I think at a certain point, you probably had guys feeling, oh, well, here we go again. This is, what happens to us. And yeah, Joey talked about, if we won a couple more games in the first half of the year, maybe we think we're a better team, and then we just keep playing better. And that's all about stringing wins together. And I think it's the coaching staff, their responsibility to make sure that you don't kind of get complacent. Not just that you don't get too down on yourselves when you're losing, but that you don't get complacent with how you're playing when you're winning. And especially early on in the season, because that's what Joey's talking about, is that early stretch where things can really be affected when you're not out of it yet. And we saw stretches where even when they were winning games, they weren't playing all that well. And we were saying, if they were playing against most other teams, or I was mostly saying it, if they were playing against most other teams, they probably wouldn't win. And I feel like the coaching staff maybe wasn't proactive enough about getting the players prepared, even though they were winning.
Yeah, it does feel like that was a part of the season, a big part of the season, and it's one where man, we just had so many games where it was just like, where is this team? Why are they not like out here for the first period or the second period? Why didn't they make adjustments or whatever? Right, whatever it was, it just was not there for them. And so I thought that was interesting. Those were the two kind of moments, though, the most during exit interviews that I felt like reflected poorly on the coaching staff. And I had made these notes before we knew Dan was not going to be back and everything. And this was very much something that I wanted to talk about anyway. But those were the things that stood out to me from those player exit interviews, just kind of explaining why the season went the way that it did. And then obviously in light of the coaching change, it's a little bit different now.
Yeah, it certainly does. Just, knowing what happened. It's something, it's interesting because it wasn't on anybody's mind as we were hearing this from the players. And I know last year with Hackstall and everything, just hearing the players talk about, we didn't have it. They didn't have any answers. They couldn't tell you what went wrong. And they just seemed kind of so dejected, where that made me shift my thinking to be like, oh man, maybe Hackstall's not coming back.
Yeah.
Like they just don't seem to have answers. I didn't get that feeling this time, but it's interesting going back in hindsight and kind of seeing, I guess, the clues that were there.
Yes. I want to open it up to you just while we're talking about player exit interviews. Anything that stood out to you from player exit interviews that you want to touch on? I know there was the Jared McCann injury stuff, and then anything else that you have.
Yeah, I'm so just some scattered notes and quotes from the player exit interviews. I mean, Jared McCann said he's going to have a procedure, or I guess at this point he already has had it, to deal with an injury he played through over the season. And so I think that might explain the lack of at least goal scoring a little bit this season, just knowing that a guy's playing through an injury. And so I think that could explain quite a bit, but he said he didn't want to give up on his team. He's not that kind of guy. And so he did play through it the rest of the way. So just important context to Jared McCann's season that I think, especially as we talk about, with him maybe being on the trade block or something for next season. And is he someone the Kraken want to move off of a down year production wise? Important context there.
Yep.
Also, I want to talk about Philip Grubauer, because I think this quote I think got the most play and the most response and reaction from people, because he was asked about his confidence this year and kind of getting his confidence back in CV. And he pushed back on that. He said, this whole year has nothing to do with confidence. It's finding the playing time. And he kind of likened it to the first game of the preseason, saying, it's always scrambly, right? And he said that when you sit on the bench for 2-3 weeks, it's basically coming out of preseason. So just basically getting into that rhythm and playing consistently, he felt like was the biggest issue for him this season. Now, reading into that a little bit more, I think, and I know people were not always happy with that response, because look, that is the job as a backup goalie, which is what he is now. It is sitting on the bench for a couple weeks sometimes, and maybe you don't get to play a game in a while. And I do think he had ample opportunity as the starter for this franchise. He was signed to starter money. He got, real like 2.5, 3 seasons of opportunity as the starting goaltender. And what he did with it was not good enough. And so I think if basically what he's saying to me, and this is where I look at the buyout conversation about whether they're going to buy out Grubauer or not. If it wasn't sealed already, I think this has to seal it, right?
Yeah.
He's basically telling you that he can't do the job that he would have to then go out and do if he stays with the team. I think at this point you have no choice but to buy him out.
Right. At the very least, if he's not saying that, he's giving you like an ultimatum, which is like, if you want me to be good, you have to give me the majority of starts so that I could be in a rhythm, which, look, you're not going to win that battle against Joey Daccord. Joey Daccord has just straight up outplayed you for 2 years now. They've signed him to an extension. He is the guy. There's just no debate about that. And look, I get it. I'm sure it is infinitely easier to play at the NHL level and be a starting goaltender and have that rhythm and have those regular starts and have that playing time. I have no doubts that what Grubauer is saying there is true. But like you kind of touched on, right? Backups throughout this league find a way of doing it. And they post better numbers than what Grubauer was posting. And I don't mean to just bash on Grubauer, and I have tried to defend him in the past and everything, but like the numbers speak for themselves. The performance speaks for itself. It was better after he got back from Coachella Valley. We talked about he should probably have been in more games, whether that's because he was playing good or also just because we wanted Joey to maybe rest a little bit more. But the point is, like, other guys are in this situation all the time, and they find a way of managing and working through it. And I get that he hasn't been a backup in a while, but like this used to be what he was, right? Like go back to his Washington years. He was the backup in Hershey because Washington was just so stocked with goaltenders. He had to he was a backup in Hershey, posted incredible numbers. Comes up to the Capitals, several years later after then becoming the starter in Hershey, is the backup, posts incredible numbers. There was a point in time in which Philip Grubauer could, getting backup numbers of starts, post really good numbers at the NHL level, and it just was not happening here. And I don't know. It came across as, like I said, either an ultimatum or as an excuse, basically, for what happened. And I think some of it is just he maybe just needs to go back to the drawing board and figure things out because it's not working. And I don't think that this works as an excuse or as a reason, as an explanation. This does not work when you have backups all around the league in the same spot and their numbers are better.
And he wouldn't be the first 33-year-old goalie to be maybe past his prime and not really a starting caliber goalie anymore. And I'm sure that's a frustrating situation to be in, especially when it means getting sent down to the minors and, talk of being bought out and everything. So, I understand mentally what I'm sure, he must be going through. It's not easy. That said, I think after saying something like this, it just, the Kraken really have no choice.
Yeah, so I think Grubauer buyout for sure is coming. Anything else from the player exit interviews that you wanted to mention? Capo Caco's choice of hat, maybe.
Yeah, still wearing the Yankees hat. I mean, that got a lot of play with people as well. And I wanted to talk Capo Caco just about the quote too. And he kind of has said this sort of thing since really coming to Seattle with the trade, but talking about just feeling that confidence is the biggest thing since he got to Seattle. He said, I feel like I got more ice time and they trust me here more. And that was just a nice quote to hear, that he's finally kind of getting the opportunity and the trust. And that's really the big difference. I know that's been the narrative with Kako really since he got here and started performing, but just good to hear it from him one more time. Maybe he needs to ditch the Yankees hat. Somebody needs to buy him a Mariners hat.
Yes.
So I think that is the biggest takeaway from Capo Caco, but he seemed happy.
He
He
did.
seemed happy here. He seemed happy with how everything's going. And, as long as the Kraken don't go with Laviolette as the next coach, I think he'll still be happy.
Yeah, no, it definitely felt that way, and yeah, he really seemed to know that, like, that being in this situation, basically all the stuff that we've been talking about, right? Whether it's you and I or people in post games, everybody just kind of seemed to recognize this, and he basically confirmed it. Having the playing time, being in that upper, top six role, being able to be somebody who can go to the net front a little bit more and play more of his game or what he thinks his game can be at the NHL level is important. And he felt like he was able to be a lot more successful because of it.
Yeah, and that's good to see. I guess the last thing I had was also I go back to the goaltending. Joey Daccord. And I mean, I would recommend just watch his entire media availability. He had so many great
He
things to say
did.
at exit interviews. But he was also the first recipient of the Andy Ide Memorial Stick Taps Award, which, of course, honoring the late Andy Ide, one of the best people in Seattle media. Just it was a privilege and honor to get to know him a little bit while we had the opportunity to. And so it's a new award. And by the way, shout out to Darren Brown and John Barr, Sound of Hockey, for really doing the legwork and coming up with this award to honor Andy. But it's given by us, the local media, to the player who was generally great to deal with this season. And I just wanted to shout out Joey Daccord. I mean, always fun to talk to. Even
Mhm.
if he's starting that day, you can walk right up to him and talk to him about whatever. And so he was just a joy to deal with in the room. And so I'm glad we kind of have this award as the media to kind of give out every year. And I hear he won in a landslide.
Yeah, I was gonna say I have the official voting breakdown, but it was not surprising. I won't share the official voting breakdown,
Okay.
but unsurprising that Joey won. I mean, it was the first person I thought of, first person you thought of when it came time to vote, and I think the first person for many. I mean, I can confirm it was the first person for many,
Yes.
given what the voting breakdown ended up being. But yes, it was really cool. To hear about that award first when we were approached about it and for voting in it and everything. I think it's a great way to remember Andy and a great way to also acknowledge the players from us in a way that's is a little bit unique and different from what we otherwise do, so as media. And so I thought that was really cool. um Kind of going back to the coaching side of things, RJ. The other big note on the coaching staff, because unless you have something else on Dan, we can kind of wrap up with Dan. But the other big note is, of course, Jess Campbell being retained, while the rest of the assistants are not.
Yeah, and so that was part of the news that kind of filtered out. And did we get that on the emergency pod? I think we did. That news came out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that Jess was
Okay.
staying. Yeah, we didn't know about the other assistants at that point, but it sounds like they're all kind of gone. I mean, we don't know about like a Steve Briere goaltending coach, maybe a Matt Lark skills coach, stuff like that. But it sounds like Dave Lowry, Bob Woods are not going to be back.
Yeah. And so with that though, Jess remaining on staff, and I not a ton of clarity on her role. And I think that's something that maybe will probably be a conversation with whoever the next head coach is. Do you keep her in the current role? Do you keep her on the bench? Does she move to more of a skills type role? Does she stay as part of the power play? Because I know the power play arrangement with her and Bob Woods, was kind of more of a unique thing. And if Bob Woods is gone, then that will necessarily have to change. But I think there was some more conversation on that. I think a lot of Kraken fans, just about all Kraken fans, are happy to hear that Jess is being retained. But I know this was something that was talked about on the sheet with Jeff Merrick and Greg Wyshynski. And I know Greg Wyshynski had some questions about it, saying that it was very unusual that you have the coaching staff gone and then you just have one assistant, a 32-year-old assistant that stays on. And I know you had some thoughts on that and thinking that maybe it wasn't as unusual as Wyshynski was making it out to be.
Yeah, because I mean, Wyshynski was going down the road that I think a lot of people from outside the Kraken, fan base and organization are going to really frame this, which is like they didn't want to fire the first woman head, assistant coach in the National Hockey League, right? And you don't want to especially let her go after only one season, right? That could be a bad look, and that they're keeping her around because as he said it, they don't want to make a history making decision, right? And that they can maybe be putting that on the next head coach to make, is like, well, that head coach doesn't want her and therefore she's not coming back. And is there a component of it that is maybe that way? Very possibly, right? Like there is the possibility that that is to some extent at play here. But what I will say is there's already precedent for this organization doing this, and that's Dave Lowry. First and foremost, it's Dave Lowry who stayed on as from being an assistant from Dave Hackstall's staff onto Dan Bylsma's staff, and that we don't know for sure, but it was always, the way it was phrased last year very much felt like that was an organizational decision so that there would be continuity from one coaching staff to the other, that there would still be an assistant there, and that then Dave Lowry actually got more responsibility under Dan than he had under Dave Hackstall, where he was more of just like an extra pair of hands and set of eyes under Dave Hackstall, and then was given like penalty killing responsibilities under Dan Bylsma. But the point remains, there is already precedent for the organization wanting to have at least one member of the coaching staff stay the same through a larger regime change, just so that there is some level of continuity with the player base. And I think a lot of what Jason Bottrell talked about yesterday was, and whether it was he was addressing this around Jess specifically or just in general, was how important it is for them to continue to develop the young players on this team and how important the future is to this team. I mean, when he was asked about the potential volatility of, having three coaches in 3 seasons, he said his response was, you can call it volatility, but I can also point, and whether or not new coaches would have trepidation about coming in because the situation is volatile. He said, you can point to the volatility. I could point to all the good young players we have as a reason why coaches would want to come here and be the head coach of the Seattle Kraken. And Bottrell expanded on that and talked about, with Jess specifically, did say whatever role she's going to be in is going to be up, and also whether or not she will continue with the Kraken is going to be up to the new head coach, but that they just thought that the work that she does helping the young players develop, it was just too strong and too important to what they have to do to let her go as part of this larger thing. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that, because you look at what she's been able to do working with players in Coachella Valley, and then this year with the Seattle Kraken. We know and we see the one-on-one work that she was doing with Maddie, with Shane, after practices, after morning skates. We know about that from Coachella Valley. Those young players and the strides that they've made on things, I really do think is a credit to them for sure, but also a credit to Jess Campbell and what she's been able to do. And I do think that she is one of the most talented skills coaches out there. I do think there's a legit conversation to be had around whether or not she's a good power play coach. Power play in Coachella Valley was iffy under her. Obviously, it was not good with the Kraken when she was involved. I think that's a fair conversation to have. I think it's a fair conversation to have whether or not she's going to be like an on bench assistant coach or more of just a skills coach. But I do think that her ability to help guys in one-on-one capacity, her ability to be a skills coach, it all speaks to why I could see an organization wanting to keep somebody like that around, especially given how young she is. And if you do think she does have potential and a future, you would want to give her that opportunity to grow, and you'd want to keep her. You wouldn't want to see her go and grow with somebody else and them benefit off of a lot of the work that you've already put into developing her as a coach.
Yeah, and I think that's really the biggest factor. It's not that she's a woman and it'd be a history-making decision. It's that she's 32. She's a young coach and a promising coach prospect that the organization clearly believes in. And so that makes sense why they'd want to keep around. Also, if you do believe in the continuity thing, as they showed with Dave Lowry, you might want to bring one assistant back. And of all the assistants, I think she certainly makes the most sense. Lowry, who then be through 3 coaches, maybe not. And Bob Woods, who was in charge of 2 things, the power play and the defense from last year, probably the 2 things that did worst on the team, probably doesn't make sense to bring him back. So I think it would just make the most sense, if you're going to bring someone back for continuity's sake, that Jess would be it. If it was up to me, I would probably move her off of the power play just to bring in a power play specialist.
Yep.
I've been calling for this for a couple of years, bring in an assistant coach who has a proven track record as a power play specialist with good results at the NHL level. Let that person just do their work. and have Jess maybe do focus on more of the skill stuff, which is her specialty. Like that is what she really excels at. And so and she could even maybe learn from a power play specialist coach too, without being half in charge of it as well. So that's kind of how I would approach it. But I don't have a problem with her being remained on staff. And I think as you all broke it all down, it does make sense if you really believe in her as the organization does.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like what I know a lot of people on the outside are going to kind of frame it as, just because they're not as familiar, right? Like Greg Wyshynski probably does not think about the Kraken that much throughout the course of a season and isn't going
Hard to
to.
blame him.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's very understandable, but certainly isn't going to think about things like Dave Lowry was under Dave Haxtell and then under Dan Bylsma, and that was the reason given for Dave Lowry hanging around, and that precedent already being set for this move with Jess. And so I do think it's important context that should be added to that conversation that is going to happen a lot, and I don't think is going to be in a lot of those conversations around things when it comes to Jess Campbell and what she can be here. That being said, it's going to be interesting to see whatever new coach comes in, what kind of coach they are, and in what capacity they are going to want to utilize her skill set, and where they're going to want to place her and everything. Now, we are 50 minutes in, RJ, 51 minutes. We just kind of clicked over here on the actual recording. So I don't know that we should dive into everything with the front office. I think we should
Probably
probably
not, 'cause I
save
have a
that
lot
for
to
a part
say.
two. Yes, I do as well. But I do think that the thing that we can talk about for the last 10 minutes here is, again, transition away from the team on the ice, transition away from the coaching staff and that more on ice product. And we could talk about something on the business side of things, because last week there was a major announcement. It was made before exit interviews even, and that was changes to the way that season ticket pricing structure is going to work. The announcement of more family packages being available for next season, to hopefully allow for more families to be able to attend games. And it was kind of like a business ticketing state of the union from Todd Lywicki that was had at 32 Bar and Grill for a lot of season ticket holders, as well as us on the media side of things. And I think it is worth talking about because, the big headline is just that season tickets got cheaper for 80% of season ticket holders. For 90% of season ticket holders, there's not seeing an increase year over year, which is, I cannot state how out of the norm this is for an organization in the world of sports.
Especially one that sells out every single game. Every game has been a sellout for the Kraken. It's not like they're worried about attendance issues. That is not a problem for them at all. But yet they've decided to decrease 80% of the season tickets. And by the way, Dylan, given some of the data points we have, especially ones that you're pretty close to, those are significant decreases. We're not talking about, a percent or two or just keeping everything pretty much level. I mean, we're talking decreases up to 40%, right?
Yeah, the majority of people that have talked to us about this are seeing things in the 30 to 40% range. There are a few people that obviously are outliers and have not, and good for them, because those are the expensive seats for the most part. But the majority of people that I've talked to, and including Julia's dropped 40%. I mean, that's a massive decrease. This isn't like a token 10% decrease just to be like, hey, we know the on ice product isn't where we all want it to be, and so we're gonna kind of make things a little bit cheaper for you. That is significant. That is massively significant. They are also overhauling the season ticket holder experience, and trying to add more benefits to being a season ticket holder, which has been a complaint that you and I have heard plenty from
Oh
people
yeah.
over the years, and obviously they have heard as well. We got to talk with them about that, and that was definitely something that came across from all of their communications with season ticket holders, and things, was that they, season ticket holders wanted more for being a season ticket holder. Like they're very heavily investing in this team. They want to feel like they're, a little special for doing so, and I don't blame them. And so they're going to create a menu of experiences that season ticket holders will be able to choose an experience from each season. I think that that's a good move. But yeah, I think that the big takeaway here, beyond just the fact that this is happening at all, which is pretty, you know, groundbreaking is I think they listened to everybody saying that the building was too expensive, and that, you mentioned that, yes, they sell out every game and that they're not worried about attendance from that standpoint. But I do wonder if they were a little worried about attendance, because you and I have seen this building the last couple of years, and there's plenty of games where we're like, is this a sellout? Because it's on paper a sellout. Those tickets were sold, but there's not butts in seats, and the energy in the building could dip. And I know that that was something that Todd Lywicki especially kind of drove home when talking about all this. Was they listened that the building was too expensive, and they didn't want to risk the building losing energy. They wanted that energy from the fans there. They want fans in the building cheering the team on. We've heard from the team. We continue to hear from the team during exit interviews this go around, right? How important it is to have that energy in the building from fans. I do think that they made the decision here, RJ, to put the bottom line aside and say it's better to have a building full of rabid, energetic fans than it is to have a corporate dominated building, which otherwise I think this was at risk of turning into.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen that happen in a lot of markets that we know. I mean, I think, LA was that for a while and probably still is that. I
Toronto
mean,
is another big example.
Toronto, yeah. I mean, San Jose has certainly become that. A little less so with the team doing so poorly, but back when they were good, it was that. And so I think that's something I think is great to try and avoid and make sure you still have that fan atmosphere at the games. And yeah, there was talk, when they talked to us about the drop rate, and so they know the actual numbers, of course, of fans that are there, so that's information that they are getting. And they also talked about the importance of having newer fans coming to the games, and it was actually a surprisingly high number to us when
Yeah.
they told us the percentage of new fans at games that had never been to a hockey game before, and they wanted to make sure that that continued, right? That you were
Yeah.
always bringing in new fans to games. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just have the number. They said that new fans at a game is anywhere between 1,500 and 2,000 people a game. That's their first ever hockey game, which is a really big number. It really surprised me considering they're 4 years in at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like that's, well, just quick percentage. That's like almost 12% of fans at any given game never seen a hockey game before. And given they're 4 years in, like that's more than I would have thought for sure. And so I think that's something they wanted to continue. And I think one of the ways that Todd Lywicki phrased it too was that we want to make this more available to families, to people coming to games for the first time. We want to keep that success going. And that means you have to offer affordable price points for them. It's harder to get new people in the building, right? If it's so expensive, if you're going to have to spend, several $100s just to bring your family, for one night, not everyone can afford that. But if you're going to do that, then you have to take care of your season ticket holders, who I know have certainly taken a hit, given the resale values and everything. And that's something the team is aware of as well. Like they know, they told us, I forget how they phrased it, but kind of readjusting to what the resale realignment with what the
Yeah.
resale market is, and wanting to take care of the season ticket holders in that respect. And so it's something that they're clearly seeing, hearing,
Hmm.
listening to. I mean, we're aware of it. But I think that's the other thing that stood out to me, was just kind of how much listening they've done, and how when they were talking about what they've heard from fans and the feedback that they've gotten over the last 4 years, it matched pretty much point for point what we've heard
Yeah.
from the community. I think it's one thing to hear that, to acknowledge it, to see what the issues are that fans have. It's another to announce changes that address that. And it's a whole other thing too to execute well on those changes. I know, with fan events, that hasn't always been the most smoothly run in the past. We've certainly heard that from fans, and they've
Yep.
got this new menu of events they're going to do, and it still is going to require them to execute well on those events
Yep.
and make sure they're well run and make sure there's something that fans really like. But I think these are the first steps toward that adjustment, and so far so good.
Yeah, I mean, it is all promising stuff, right? We haven't seen the end result. I would still argue certain things are still too expensive, like they want 10% of tickets per game, I believe is what Todd said, to be family plans and available to families, and be lower priced entry points for people, and that's all well and good. The family plans that they're talking about and the price points that they're talking about, still a lot more than I remember paying going to Ducks games or Sharks games back in the day, all of that kind of stuff. But they are significantly better than what they were, right? Like, I still don't know that this is going to be a super accessible building to people out there, like,
Yeah.
realistically. And I think that that is still something to acknowledge, but it's a lot more accessible than it was. And I do credit them for doing that. Like I said, 30 to 40% drop in season ticket prices is a massive drop. That is you're at that point really putting your money where your mouth is. You are acknowledging the pain that season ticket holders have taken, who are the lifeblood of sports, by the way, right? Like fans are, and none of this exists without fans wanting to spend money. Season ticket holders are the ones that are going to really drive that. Taking care of them is important, and I think that they are with this. Um, so, I still have concerns about around some of the price points. It still is expensive. Seattle is an expensive city. I mean, like, that is just the way it is right now. But it is still kind of positive changes. And, in a world where we know sports has an aging demographic problem, you and I have talked about this in the past. We talked about this a lot, especially year one and year two, when, you know, the price point was what it was, and it was very shocking. And it was something that you and I were deeply concerned about, because going to games as children is how you and I became hockey fans. It's how so many people we know became hockey fans. It's how Todd Lywicki said he became a hockey fan, was going to a game as a child and being able to get into that building, and making that affordable for families. And so I am appreciative that they are making this effort to make it more affordable for families to come. I think they're recognizing that, yes, sports, hockey especially, has an aging demographics problem. The best way to deal with that is to get kids in. And I think, and I've talked about this on more like red glare kinds of things. So much of that I really do believe has been because of how expensive it's gotten to go to games, and families aren't able to go to games as frequently or at all. And if you're not taking your kid to a game, they're not going to fall in love with the sport. It's just not going to happen. Or it's going to be very difficult. And you're talking about a much smaller percentage of children becoming sports fans. And I think that this is something that sports as a whole is going to have to reckon with at some point. The fact that Gen Z did not grow up going to sporting events because they were too expensive, and now Gen Z does not care about sports, is something that sports leagues at some point are going to have to take note of as older and older generations start disappearing. And I think that the Kraken recognizing that, acknowledging it, and taking some steps. Again, it's not as far as I would personally like, but they are taking some steps in that direction, I think is really, really important.
And I think it starts with the mindset change, especially for kids where, yeah, they don't have their own disposable income right now. If you're thinking about it just from a business standpoint, about what are our profits going to look like next year and the year after that, it doesn't make sense to have kids be able to come to games and be more family oriented and all that stuff. And I think you saw a lot of that where sports as a whole failed with Gen Z, where I think there was a lot of focus on just the profits right now, and
Mhm.
particularly NHL loves to think that way. And so I think at least kind of the shifting of mindset here, where, if you're the Kraken and you're trying to maximize your profits for the next couple of years, this isn't what you do. But I think, it's that having that long-term viewpoint that, again, I agree. It's not as far as I would go either, but, most organizations kind of wouldn't move in this direction at all. So I think, we'll take the,
Yeah.
take the improvement here, I think.
Definitely. And there, I think a lot of it, with all of this, is I completely lost my train of thought. I thought something. No, I mean, obviously it's good. I didn't want to just kind of repeat that, like, oh, it's still a good step in the right direction. I had something. Oh well. The other thing that I thought was interesting about it, RJ, was, obviously talking about making things more accessible. Oh, what I was going to say is they obviously want to make sure that they're continuing to grow the Kraken brand. That's very important for them. That they want to see that growth, that they make it more accessible to families and the kids and all that stuff that we just talked about. But just, I think they know the NBA is coming, and they want the brand to be on really solid ground. And obviously the best way to do that is to have a winning team. But I think that they're recognizing that the team is not winning. It's probably not going to win significantly in the short term. So we have to do something else to shore up the brand. whether it's for the Sonics coming back or just in general, just so people don't kind of burn out on it and go, well, I spent $200 to get into the building and I watched this team get caved in. I watch them get caved in on Amazon Prime every night. Like, why should I keep going for this? Especially if I can't go and enjoy the in-person experience, right? Like, that is something that they are aware of, and I think that they're addressing in the way that is a lot easier to address, which is on the business side of things, because it's, obviously the hockey is going to drive it at the end of the day, but it's a lot harder to overhaul the roster and make it good than it is to create more family plans, to drop season ticket pricing, to make it more accessible to get into the building. That's all a lot more within their control, we'll say.
Yeah, I mean, the people working on this stuff, they can't control the roster. They have zero control over that, so they can just do what they can do.
Yes, but the other thing that Todd Lewicki talked about was their viewership increase from last season since they left Root Sports, and talking about how having the streaming available on Amazon and partnering with them for streaming has really opened up a lot of markets for them, which is something that you and I have also seen a lot more people joining the ECH community from places like Oregon or Idaho or Montana or any of those places. So that's been going well. But there's two things on that. One, they keep phrasing it like it's this revolutionary thing, that like, oh, we brought the broadcast in-house, we work with the local TV partners over the air, and then we're doing this streaming thing on the back end to make this more accessible, and how groundbreaking and visionary this is. And I'm like, we were calling for this last offseason because multiple other teams in your league were doing it, as well as other sports. I get that you want to give yourself the dub here, but I don't know that you can totally do that.
I think it's probably a reflection of just reflecting on the difficulty of starting a network, doing all that stuff in such a short timeline.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that was a massive task that needed to be done. I'm sure they haven't done everything they would like to do. That said, yeah, other teams have done this. Like this,
we were pointing to Vegas had done this already.
This is getting with the times. This is being in the present and operating as a modern sports organization.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting was the final number on the viewership increase since leaving Root Sports was 3x. At the beginning of the year, when we were a month into the season, it was 5x, and then around New Year's it was 4x, and then at the end of the season it was 3x. And look, should this be surprising? No, it shouldn't. The team was bad, and the team was bad pretty early on, and it stayed bad all year. So yeah, viewership was going to decline, just like it declined on Root Sports over the course of a season when the team was bad. But I did notice that that's a pretty significant drop off, because when you're talking about multipliers like that, going from 5x to 3x is a pretty steep decline over the course of a season.
Yeah, I mean, you're from the beginning to the end, you're losing 2 times your entire viewership from last season is what that tells me. And so, I mean, really, that just points at how important the on-ice product is and actually having a winning team. And I think that's something that the organization recognizes. And I mean, in part 2 of this, we're going to get a lot deeper into that problem that needs to be solved and how confident we are that the organization can solve it with the new configuration. But that really does drive everything.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on what I was doing, because I was going to use that as the segue into next week's kind of part 2 of the season recap. And when we talk about the front office there, you did a great job with it there, RJ. Want to thank everybody for listening to this one. Thanks everybody for listening to the emergency reaction pod a couple days ago, for listening to this one. We're going to have so much more on everything next week on the deep dive as well. And you won't even have to wait a full 7 days, because it'll come next Monday. And so, just a 5-day wait instead. That's pretty nice.
Yeah. I was going to try and ask you, let's just roll right into it. Record it right now and just no, it's fine. It's
just do three deep dives in 1 week. What will we talk about after everything else, RJ? We have a whole off season we got to try to get through content.
That's it. I'm spoiled with so much going on right now that I need to let it sit, because we got a long off season in front of us. We got to let it marinate. And I think we could use a few extra days to just let this all sit and come up with some new thoughts that I'm sure we wouldn't otherwise have.
Yeah, just like you're going to be sitting around for the foreseeable future with your foot in that boot, RJ, after your, we'll call it an accident, after your friendly fire accident, we'll call it there.
Thanks, Nick.
And there you go. Call them out by name. But want to thank our wonderful sponsor one more time, the law offices of Rico Tessendorf, for sponsoring the podcast as always. And while we hope none of you ever need his services, the odds say at some point someone out there will be involved in an accident. And when you are, we hope you call Rico at 425-778-9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com, to schedule a free consultation. He's won millions of dollars for his clients and helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we will see you all next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons.
Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.